a link on almost a part of the spectrum sort of thing. So, yeah, I think it was a huge thing for me. And it started off as a book about my childhood, specifically for my son, and then it kind of sort of mutated into, a kind of thing about my early life. But I was very determined that it was going to stop before Suede really happened. That was when we signed, was a very symbolic moment for me.
And you knew that from the outset, so there wasn't any wavering from that.
Yeah, that was always the thing. And I kind of took the book. I wrote a very early version of the book, and I sort of took it to lots of publishers, and most of them, apart from the actual publishers I ended up with, Bill Brown, but they were brilliant because they kind of got it. They got that the book was just the book. But most of the publishers turned around and said, "Well, this is good, but where's the rest of it?" And I said, "Well, there's not going to be a rest of it. It's just this is where it's going to finish." They didn't quite most of them didn't quite get that. So, but yeah, that was always the idea that I was going to have that discipline.
And can you remember? Was there a moment where you sort of kind of realised, I think I'm just going to have to write this all down? Was there like a light bulb moment?
Yeah, I just sort of I wrote and I wrote a bit more, and I sort of sat on it for a while, and there was a point where I thought, oh, no, I'm not going to. There was a point actually where I felt that I was giving too much myself away, and bizarrely enough, for someone who's just written an incredibly personal, detailed memoir of my life, I'm actually quite a private person. I don't like it. It sounds like such a contradiction. It is a contradiction, but for me, the reason I was able to let it out into the world was because I had so much control over it. It felt like I was releasing it completely on my own terms. And I think even when you do an interview, you might say, well, you're on your own terms, but you can almost kind of like say something you might regret. And with a book, as you know, you can sort of like, you wake up the next morning and think, no, I'm not happy with that bit, I want to go back. And it's a very, very long process. It's a series of checks and balances that make you very sure that what you're releasing in the end, you're happy with.
Did it consume you? Did you go to bed thinking, okay, did you fall asleep thinking about what you were going to do next in the book?
Yeah, it became a bit of an obsession actually, and actually it really acted as as almost sort of a time machine, for want of a better phrase. I did find myself kind of being transported back to these times, which was a kind of amazing experience. I mean, writing about the death of my mum it took me back to 1989. It was kind of an unbelievable thing. It was a strange experience, and allowed me to feel things that I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years.
That's a very moving scene in the book, because it sort of, without wanting to give too much away, but you sort of get a sort of inkling that something was wrong while you're at sort of university, and the kind of collision of these two worlds where you're in this place where, for many of us, when we're in that kind of environment, that we're trying to sort of forget that we're from a family because we're trying to reinvent ourselves. And you kind of get this call which tells you that something's up. I mean, that must have been very sort of difficult to revisit.
That's a very good point, actually. I hadn't even really thought of that before. You're absolutely right. That is the period in your life when you're trying to break away from your family in every possible way, aren't you? You kind of move away from home for the first time off, and you're kind of, it's that opportunity to become someone else almost, isn't it? And then you're absolutely right. But that was a hugely influential, chapter. I think it's chapter 6, where when I meet Justine, and then my mother dies. That's probably the most influential sort of chapter in when it comes to what sort of Suede became in lots of ways. I think those two events were hugely influential in what I went on to write about.
I mean, that's the period in your life in which you almost start. And one of the great things about this book is you see it almost happening before our eyes. You sort of it kind of turns you into an artist in a way, doesn't it? That sequence of events in your life.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I want to do. And your point about how it relates to the songs. I've always, as a fan of other people, I've always been fascinated by that. My favourite books by something like that. There's a Paul McCartney book called Many Years From Now, which I really. And there's so many books about the Beatles, and I have the story of the Beatles. It's like, everyone knows the story. But him sitting down and talking about where the songs came from, I find it absolutely fascinating. Those songs that you know so well, that are almost part of the fabric of one's life, and to hear where the little sort of memories of how those songs came about. As a songwriter myself, I find it absolutely fascinating. So I wanted to sort of bring some of that into my book, and hopefully, you know, I never really know whether I'm just interested in that because I'm a musician, or whether it's just something that everyone's interested in.
I think it is, you know, because, you know, the cliche about that is that, you know, you mustn't expose the workings because it strips the songs of their mystery. But I think actually songs just innately keep them, no matter how much you kind of learn about how a song is made.
Yeah.
If it's a really great song, it will still, it's innately mysterious, that process by which it becomes an amazing piece of art. And we get this a lot in the book, you know, this sort of these sort of slightly dystopian scenes. Except they're not dystopian in a science fiction sense, because they're actually like the areas where you sort of grew up in. So you describe a sort of a kind of wasteland of kind of discarded mattresses and electrical appliances, which was near where you lived in Haywards Heath. And it's almost like a kind of it's like a post-nuclear way that you sort of describe.
Yes.
I mean, do you want to elaborate?
It's like a sort of scene from Mad Max or something, isn't it? You know, or the Road or something like that. Yeah. I mean, it's made me sort of think a lot about what, you know, when you're writing a memoir, you know, what you choose to talk about it. But you could sit and describe this room in two completely different ways, couldn't you? Just depending on the language you chose.
Yeah.
You could paint it as a bleak, barren space, or you could paint it. I don't know. You know. And I chose to sort of like, you know, I chose to tell a story to a certain extent. And as a writer, it's like writing a song. You're writing a melody. You're entertaining people to a certain extent, sort of thing. But it's not. You're not lying. I wasn't lying about anything that happened. But yeah, my childhood. It was a kind of colourful childhood. I never really fitted in. I didn't ever feel as though my family fitted into any particular sort of social niche. We were from a very, very poor family. We lived in a kind of council estate, but it was a council estate perched on the edge of a pretty little village. So officially we came from this place called Linfield, which is this amazing, lovely little village, but it was this sort of weird little... So all of these, you know, I wasn't sort of like, you know, I wasn't like a working class boy brought up in a mining community or in a tower block in Hackney or something like that. It was a very strange, liminal sort of working class upbringing. And I wanted to tease out some of that sense. And I think the relevance there is that what I went on to write about with Sway always had that kind of like, that sense of outsiderdom about it. And that was something that I always cherished when I was writing in Sway. And that was a theme that I revisited over and over again.
Yeah. We've lost, I think, just in terms of the way the makeup of society has sort of changed, I think we've lost that a bit because you know, for instance, the libraries played a much greater part in people's lives, so there was that kind of scope.
Rather than no part now, yeah.
Well, certainly, you know, it's even finding a library that's kind of well stocked.
Yeah.
And so you had this kind of like in post-war times, you had this kind of self-improving kind of ethic which kind of traversed the classes. And you know, your father, well, but both of your parents are a sort of fascinating example of these, a reminder of the fact that you couldn't really generalise in any way about what different sort of class groups were sort of. So your father was this man who revered Franz Liszt to such a degree. Tell the jury service story.
He got called up for jury service and they asked him to swear an oath, and he refused to swear on the Bible and insisted that he swore in a biography of Franz Liszt instead. And he was a kind of extraordinary man, and he used to, you know, all sorts of little vignettes about him. He used to go in his Morris Traveller, which is an ancient kind of 1960s car, and somehow he used to drive it to Hungary every year or every couple of years. And he used to go to Franz Liszt's birthplace and pick up a piece of soil from the ground and wear it in a little file around his neck. And these are true stories. My dad was an utter eccentric. He used to do things like, you know, BBC Two's closed down, then they used to play the national anthem, he'd salute. Stand up and salute, but not in an ironic way.
Was there an element of performance? There's one thing I didn't quite get in the book. I couldn't tell how much of this was sort of performative. So, you know, because often, and I've sort of found myself on occasion doing this with my kids. I almost kind of want to instill a kind of what I think is a kind of an important detail about who I am, what my values are,
Yes.
so I might overdo something. Do you think there was an
That's a very good question. I think there was that element as well. I think he was slightly aware of sort of self-mythologizing in a funny sort of way. He was a bit of a, possibly I got my kind of like my sort of like, you know, my performance gene from him in a funny sort of way, even though he never stepped foot on the stage. His stage was the house and his taxi and stuff like that, but he definitely had that sort of sense of, yeah, he was aware of his own self-myth, yeah.
Something very beautiful about being in this, you know, and I think, I imagine another important thing for you in the book was maybe a sense of, okay, it's one thing to say, I kind of grew up in this sort of poor background, but I think maybe people who, until they read this book, people might not actually realise the degree to which you were deprived of.
It felt, yeah, I mean, I said in the book, I wasn't really aware of it at the time. It wasn't until later that I didn't really realise that other children didn't kind of used to have to skin rabbits to eat dinner, and didn't used to go foraging for mushrooms and berries and things like this.
So you remember your mother? Was it your mother that skinned the rabbits?
My mum skinned the rabbits, yeah, but we all used to go foraging for mushrooms. So it sounds like the Four Yorkshiremen sketch. It sounds terrible, like I'm kind of trying to find some sort of like, you know, yeah. But it kind of, yeah, it genuinely was like that at times.
It's an art to skinning a rabbit, isn't there?
There is. You've got to pull the. Yeah, I could never do it. It's horrible.
You're a vegetarian now.
Yes, absolutely.
And your mum was also in a different way. Also quite a bohemian character. Her paintings were sort of dotted around the house. And,
yeah.
You know, there's a huge amount of you write very protectively about your mother, actually.
Yeah. No, she was a kind of an amazing person. You know, she was very, very creative. She was always sort of doing something, always making something, always fixing something, always mending something. She's very industrious. And yeah, she had an art college upbringing, so she sort of introduced me to sort of like, you know, I definitely get my visual sense from her. Yeah.
You must have, when you sort of were kind of tending in that direction, that must have been a source of pride for her. Was she kind of vocal in that way?
Well, funnily enough, when I was at school, I wasn't sort of, I didn't study anything artistic. I ended up studying physics, chemistry, and maths, and then ended up doing some bizarre degree in town and country planning. So, and she died before Suede really got anywhere. So she didn't really see.
She's quite supportive of your very early musical.
She
was.
So
than your father.
Yeah, she was. She was kind of, you know, my dad had a strange kind of. Like I said, I almost sensed that he sensed a certain sort of betrayal, because my music that I was into and that I was trying to make was a kind of contradiction to the values that the music that he loved. And he was a very sort of like tribalistic person who's, you know, but I think that's what pop music used to be so effective at doing. It used to kind of like instill a challenge between the generations, which it may or may not do, and I don't know if it does that so much anymore, but that used to be almost like the purpose of pop music, I think.
Well, you became a teenager in tribal times, and
yes.
You evoked that moment of going to secondary school, and you know, sort of two-tone was happening, some kids were sort of mods, and I didn't realise the degree to which sort of punk was such an influence on you.
Huge, yeah, that was a huge influence.
And it's interesting that. Sorry, go on.
No, yeah, the whole punk thing. It's something that's not really picked up on with Suede. When people talk about our influences, that they always sort of refer to David Bowie and the Smiths, and they said those two things seem to be. But the Pistols were huge for me, you know. But I don't think it ever really came out in anything tangible in the music, so people tend not to reference it.
Punk sort of lasted longer, didn't it, in the suburbs, I think, than it did in London. So even though it was kind of almost over in London by the end of 1977 for some people, you know, what you evoke very well is that sort of sense that in the suburbs where you're bored a lot of the time, then groups that you reference in the book, like UK Subs, for instance, are still sort of kind of relevant to that sense of not having any prospects.
Yeah.
And there was no reason for you to believe that you had any prospects.
Yeah. No, I didn't really ever, you know, when I bought the Sex Pistols album in, I don't know, 1978 or 79 or something like that. I didn't even know they'd split up. You know, it's that kind of thing. You're so sort of removed from, you know, you don't have that kind of information, you know, and punk was just punk, you know. For me, the Sex Pistols and the UK subs were part of the same group, even though obviously culturally they're not, kind of thing. You know? But I wasn't really aware of that, of the fine tuning of that detail, I don't think.
And you sort of, what the spur for you to kind of make music yourself? I kind of got the impression partly it was, well, your sister's guitar being left in the house.
Yeah.
To art college.
Yeah, that was the thing. I just sort of found myself, I just sort of picked it up and just started thrumming away. And I don't know, I think I just, again, going back to my mother's influence, you know, that sense that if you wanted something, you made it yourself. Mm. And that was always, you know, my dad used to make things like his cabinet for his speakers, and everything in the house was homemade, furniture and literally everything. You know, we bought very, very few things. And so when it came to kind of music, it sort of like didn't seem that much of a kind of unusual thing to try and make my own music, kind of thing, even though it wasn't very good.
Is that something you've inherited, the ability to
make not very good music?
So if I was to go around your house, would I find a kind of cabinet that you've made yourself?
Me? It wouldn't be very useful. I'm one of the least practical people. No.
I was wondering if that was one of your
hits. My skill set lies elsewhere. I'm certainly not a good cabinet maker.
The arrival of Matt in your early story, Matt Osmond, is it feels very significant, and you hit it off sort of straight away. What was there a sense that you were waiting for someone like that to sort of kind of spark you off, kind of creative, or was it just merely a fact that you liked being around him?
I didn't know I was waiting for someone like that. But looking back, it's interesting, isn't it? Kind of like you can make sense of these things, but you just stumble through, you and meet people. But Matt was hugely influential. You know, he was always a very, very cultured person, even from when we were, you know, quite young. When I first met him, he always knew about things that I didn't know about, and you know, he knew about literature and culture and politics as well. He was very well versed in those sort of things. So I learned a hell of a lot from that. Yeah, he was a huge, and still is a key voice in the band. Yeah.
I used to go around to his house. I mean, there was 60s music was one of your first sort of shared passions, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. We both got really into 60s music.
This brings me to my first. I've got a series of guest questions. I've just got
people that haven't got the guts to come and ask me to my face. They're hiding behind a screen.
So one of the people that doesn't have the guts to come up and say his two faces, Matt's brother Richard. He said that having read the extract which features me, I'm tempted to ask the question, could you keep the noise down? I'm trying to do my English homework.
It's funny with Richard now, isn't it? He literally can't turn the television on without seeing his bloody face.
Anyway, he goes on to say, as someone who saw and heard them playing and plotting as teenagers, I'd just like to tell Brett I am so proud of everything he and Matt have achieved. I know where they came from, and I know the talent and hard work it took to achieve what they have. To be associated in a small way with Suede has made my life infinitely cooler and more interesting.
That's very lovely. Wow.
And that's not even the question.
That's a statement. Yeah.
If I'm forced to ask a question, how about this? I vividly remember hearing Just a Girl, which was one of your songs, and thinking, holy fuck, they're actually going to be famous. What was the first song you wrote that made you think that this might be more than a teenage hobby?
Very good question. Well, that was the first song that I wrote that actually ever made it to any sort of release. So that was the first time that I wrote something that had some sort of melody and narrative and story and stuff like that. And still something quite nice about that song, actually. But I had no idea that Richard felt those things. He was, like I say in the book, he was a bit of a grumpy teenager. Hilarious.
Who were you sort of trying to emulate at this point?
Oh God, we're into sort of 60s, a weird sort of mixture of sort of 60s stuff and sort of like, you know, alternative stuff. But we were into kind of like things like Felt and, you know, from Felt and
Post C86 as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's a mixture of sort of like Felt. I suppose there was that crossover, wasn't there? There was a sort of 60s bit, early Primal Scream stuff like Sonic Flower Groove and that sort of thing, sort of things. It wasn't completely original, but Jefferson Airplane and things like that, and all those kind of bands.
And what was it about that music that you think kind of intersected with sort of the identity that you were trying to? What was it of yourself that you saw in that music that was potentially useful to you?
I like the fact that it wasn't what everyone else was listening to. I suppose it was a sort of a slightly romanticised kind of idea of myself. You know, I've never liked sort of following the herd. That's always been a motivation for me, not to want to follow the herd.
And around about this time, if I happened to be walking past Sainsbury's in Haywards Heath, I would have...
Really glad that you didn't. really wasn't very good.
For people that haven't read the book, what would I have seen?
You'd have sort of seen me kind of thrumming away on my sort of out of tune guitar, trying to sing With God on Our Side by Bob Dylan. It was just awful, you know.
Did you ever sort of see anyone you knew walk past?
Luckily not, but people used to pay me to leave. And you just, it was 10p. But no, it wasn't good. It sounds, I'm really glad hopefully, there's no record of these things. It's like me and with the Morris dance thing. It's kind of think, I really hope that there's not going to be a picture of me turn up with bells around the side. It's Photoshop these days, of course. So hopefully not. It's much better. Put it this way: it's much better as an idea than a reality. Leave it as an idea. You can rest in peace.
It's kind of rather romantic kind of episode towards the end of the book where your friendship with Matt is very close, and then you sort of become a sort of trio really with Justine. It comes along, and there's something quite cinematic about the arrival of Justine in the book. I mean, I almost fell in love with her. Just your description of her. I mean, it's did she have just that alpha quality? What was it?
Well, I think kind of anyone that you fall in love with or whatever you meet, or whatever you romanticise them, don't you? And I've got there was a review of the book saying that my description of her was Arcadian, and I thought that was kind of quite a kind of good description. It's very sort of, it's very romanticised, sort of sitting there in the soft October sunshine. It's slightly florid, isn't it? But I think it's necessary to like I said, it's necessary to sort of like to use language to tell a story, to almost evoke how you felt at the time. And even though some of the language is a little bit florid at that point, I didn't want to be prosaic about it because my life didn't feel prosaic at that moment. Like any moment when you fall in love, it's an incredibly exciting time and your emotions are all over the place.
You're very clear about you're very good at conveying what you saw in her. What do you think she saw in you?
I really don't know. It's a really good question. You actually have to ask her. I mean, I was some sort of, I describe myself as a gauche provincial twig. and that's pretty much what, some kind of scruffy, poor kid from Haywards Heath that used to spoon like this. Look at my shoes. So I honestly don't know. She must have seen something in me. I don't know what it was.
Just as there was something exotic about her. Do you think?
I think it was like a thing where my background must have seemed quite exotic to her.
Yeah.
But a kid born in a kind of crappy council house in Haywards Heath might have seemed diametrically opposed to her worlds. Possibly that was it, but possibly that sort of slightly belittles our relationship. I don't mean it like that at all. I'm just trying to intellectualise it. I don't know. I'm sort of joking around about it and trivialising it. There was a chemistry that was amazing, and these things happen very few times in your life. And I didn't want to. And another point, it was very tricky for me to describe our relationship and do it and not undermine it in any way. And that was a really, really important thing for me with all the relationships in the book, but especially hers, because I didn't want to I certainly didn't want to trivialise it, and I didn't want to kind of come out of it and think, God, I wish I hadn't said that about us. And there were always things that I didn't give away, because there were always things that are kind of going to be private, and that comes back to what I was saying earlier about me doing it completely on my own terms. I feel as though what I've given away, I'm happy to give away, but beyond that point, the shutters come down and I won't say any more about it.
And were you, the people that featured in the book, like Justine and Bernard and Matt, were you careful did you kind of run everything by them before?
No, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have to get into this thing where I was sort of like writing to them for approval. I think that I'd be on really dodgy ground, and the book would have taken 20 years to finish if I'd have. I wrote to them all and said, look, I'm doing this book. Please trust me. It's not going to be a kind of kiss and tell expose. You've got to just trust me. It's just going to be. It's all going to be. And they did, and they were fine about it, and then the lawsuits came through. Hopefully my fee for doing this is going to cover the...
You did actually hear back from them. They said, "Oh, go ahead," sort of thing.
Yeah, it was all. I think they're all okay. I mean, it's a tricky one.
Well, you've not been unkind about it.
No, but it's a kind of it's kind of bringing it's taking people's turning our private lives into a sort of public thing, and I think no matter how kind I am about people, there's still a bit of a kind of. If it was the other way around, I'd be a bit, really, you're going to do that? You know what I mean? But I had to, in the end, they trusted me. Hopefully.
Well, rightly so, I think. I mean, it's everyone comes out. I mean, there's so much affection that kind of sort of billows out towards them from your writing.
Yeah.
And they all. What's very good is that we see that they're all kind of. We see the ways in which they're all kind of crucial building blocks. In terms of the person you had to become in order to sway work, really.
Yes.
The whole period in London, this kind of, especially sort of Matt going off to London, and suddenly sort of you're having to, there's this kind of a excitement around Matt and the life that he's living, and you sort of almost can't get a sense, so you're kind of hanging on in there.
Yes, he moved to London, I moved to Manchester, and I sort of moved up there in a very sort of kind of quixotic. It was a very quixotic decision based around the fact that I liked some records that being made in Manchester. I don't really know, these are the kind of decisions I make in my life. And I kind of got a lot of fondness for Manchester, but it was never really felt at home. And Matt moved to London, and I sort of slowly realised, okay, I need to be in London, and I moved, changed university and everything.
And a couple of things I briefly want to sort of touch on before we get to a couple more questions, and then you guys. First of all, your mother dying, and your sort of decision to stay away from the funeral, which
wasn't really a decision. It was I couldn't get out of bed. It was almost like it wasn't sort of like a kind of a conscious decision. It was just,
But it's
I was kind of too crushed.
I sort of rather felt, obviously, as anyone would, I sort of felt for you to write that passage. Not so much just for that, but the fact that, it's clearly something that you sort of had, you regretted massively afterwards.
Yeah.
But was it sort of a cathartic, did it help to write that stuff down?
It did, it did. It almost, the very fact of writing it down, almost, it's a sort of public recognition in itself, isn't it? I mean, and that's what a funeral is, isn't it? It's a sort of public recognition of of your grief, and I suppose writing it down in the book was, yeah, it did help. Yeah, but I used a lot of the book in lots of ways as kind of therapy, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, that thing of kind of like sort of using it as a mirror, and using it as a mirror to sort of bounce, to find the answers that are buried inside you anyway.
Yeah.
You know, it's what happens with a psychoanalyst, isn't it? They just literally just sort of reflect your questions back at you, and you find the answers yourself.
Did it change what you thought about yourself?
I don't know yet. That's a good question, but I don't know. Maybe I'll be able to answer that in a year's time. I can never really tell. I'm too in the moment with it. I'm too close to it.
Bernard comes along, and I think again he's a great character. You know, but Bernard, Matt, and Justine are all sort of great characters on the page. I think.
Yeah.
And this kind of this drive that Bernard has, which is clearly seemed to startle you into action. Did you sort of feel like you almost had to work harder to keep him near you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, when we first met Bernard, he was just a different level to us. We were kind of three kind of dreamers with very big ideas and very small ability. And then Bernard came along and sat in the flat in Highlever Road, it was, in 1989 or whatever, and sat there and played the guitar. And it was kind of shocking, you know, to see someone that could actually, you know, his ability. And it was just like, oh my God, so this is, people can actually do this, you know, it's kind of amazing. And there's, as you know, watching Bernard play is a kind of, it's an experience in itself. There's something, I describe it as the skill and intensity of a surgeon in the way he plays. It's kind of like, there's just that, he just commands the instrument. And it's, you know, I often find myself, when I've worked with Bernard in the past, when we've rehearsed, I remember I just kind of can't stop watching him play. I'm kind of trying to concentrate on writing the lyric, and I'm like this, because I find it fascinating. He's there with the instrument, it's amazing. And it was about catching up with him, and I found that very inspiring. You know, realising that you know, I suppose before I'd sort of had this sort of, you know, slightly kind of like solipsistic vision of myself as being, you know, an artist or whatever. And if I really want to be an artist, that's the level I've got to get to. And then it was the challenge, and part of the dynamic of the writing partnership is that challenge. It's sort of saying, look, I've done this, you've got to kind of match it. You know, and there's a power differential there which can mutate into a split, and if it's not maintained properly, and that's what happens with all of these. You know, happened with me and Bernard. It happened over and over again in rock history. But there needs to be a power differential there in order to challenge each other and keep pushing each other on.
And we could see it. One of the great things about a lot of those early music, we could almost see it being played out before us on stage. And I mean, I might have misremembered this, but in the book, there's this kind of magic breakthrough moment with the Drowners, isn't there?
Yeah.
Which is
that was a key thing, and it's sort of, you know, it's fitting that it went on to be the first single, because that was the first time that I felt that we really unlocked the door to kind of, I don't know what, writing a good song, whatever, but you know, using kind of the hooks and just, I don't know, it was the first moment for me where we really got the key.
I've read about this equivalent moment in different people's you know, books, different musicians' books, where you write a song that you know is gonna, that's, you know, at the moment it's your secret, but you know that when it kind of is let out into the world, then everyone's gonna love it as much as you love it. And you must have had that with that song. We
did, and there's always that sort of fear when you write something really good that you're worried that someone might kind of accidentally write exactly the same thing. But, you know, it's never going to happen. But but there was a period when we were, you know, after we sort of started writing good material for the first time, there was a sort of weird period where still no one was interested, and that was a kind of probably about a year. You know, we had songs like To the Birds and Drowners and all of these songs that ended up on the first album, and we were playing them to you know, there was regularly more people on stage than in the audience.
Yeah.
It was that kind of that
You
kind
write,
of deal.
one quite evocative thing is when you write about the kind of empty D
Yes.
in front of the stage.
Yeah, often there wasn't even a D, it was just a sort of, you know, a dot. And we played to one person once, you know.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, it's kind of...
You opened for Claire Grogan, didn't you?
We did, yeah.
Which brings me to my next question.
From Claire Grogan? Oh my God. I didn't steal her rider, did I?
Funny you should say that. She said that the night of that, I don't know if she's joking, but you can imagine, she said the disappearance that night of my orange-only Smarties in a china bowl that was always on my rider. They were there one minute and gone the next. Does Brett know anything about it?
I don't know.
Really?
I have no idea about that now.
Okay. I'm going to go straight to another question, if I may. This is a bit. Sorry, is this harrowing for you?
No.
This is God knows how I got her to supply me with a question, but it's from Kathleen Moran.
Do you know her at all?
We've met on occasion. You probably heard about the news about NME.
I have, yes.
Now that must be very more than for most people. Must be kind of quite poignant news for you.
Yeah, I think it's very sad, actually.
Well, Kathleen says, do you think that Suede would make transplanted to the present tense?
Yeah.
Do you think Suede would make it today without the music press?
Without the music, well, there is music press, isn't there? But it's just sort of in different places. It's just not so sort of centralised. Who knows? Hopefully, I'd like to think that, you know, what we were doing, but it's a different time.